Okay. So I wonder if if somebody from the audience speaks, you would also like them to have.
It would be nice,
right?
just
Because
for the recording.
yeah. So let's see how that works. Because
Yeah, so maybe it's also a good way to welcome you all to this 6th series of the Critical Fridays event, where we invited different performance artists, filmmakers, body workers, to, on the one hand, show their work, but also to go into a reflection mode about what is this practice about, and to have a conversation. And so we are very glad that Ayoto, you're here with us today, and that we could see your film, and that we now, kind of in the spirit of Critical Friday, can go into this conversation and dig a little bit deeper, kind of what this movie is about. So my name is Carla, and we have Matís. We do this event series together. And maybe, I think you already have the first question in mind, so I would hand you the microphone.
I take over again. I don't have a question right away to you, Ayoto, because like also a bit the spirit of the idea of Critical Fridays is also to talk about the experience of the audience. And I mean, it's the film, and for me personally, when I saw the film the first time, I was very moved in a lot of different ways, up and down, and I really enjoyed that. I found it interesting also, and yeah, Critical Friday is always also trying to create experiences and not only talk about things in a theoretical way, but also like talk about what does it actually do to me, and where is it, and that's also the reason for the ceremony that we did before, because it also like adds some aspect of what's also a topic in the film, but on a, yeah. But, so the question is rather, do you have any questions? Is there something that you would like to share or say in whatever way is welcome, basically?
It's funny how you said that you felt very moved up and down, because I also had a lot of conflicting feelings, very, very conflicting feelings. And then I often thought, would I look as dumb? And can I embrace it still without feeling very ashamed of myself? And I mean, I thought it was very clever, or I appreciated the carefulness that you applied to these individuals, whilst on one side making very also a bit obvious that you also had critical thoughts about them, but still being very tender towards their soft sides. And I think this is a very often a conflicting feeling that I have inside myself, thinking about all kinds of experience that I have, that I can look at them from a mocking perspective or from a soft perspective. And both perspectives are very valid and very real and important, also probably in sort of a balance, but it also I have this inner gnome that always wants to go like, no, it's possible, like that. So I was surprised how many ups and downs and arounds I made. Also self-seeing somehow.
I'm just repeating it to be properly in the microphone. The question, like, it's how did you deal with the ambivalence that Anna was just talking about and explaining, that it's so hard to see it and deal with it, and
It's thanks first of all to invite me here and to watch it with you guys, and this is quite an intimate scene. It's like watching DVDs at home with a friend or something like that, you know. It's not like at the cinema, then you're talking to the big other, you have no idea who is there and what. And I just remember, I think you and Beata was sitting in the front, and you guys were very loud and very like uncomfortable, and I could feel your discomfort. And then I was getting more and more nervous by you guys, and I tried to like ignore, and it was very too intimate. So yeah, and that was like one of the things that I felt was like a mantra that the people were repeating to themselves. This mantra of intimacy and so yes, like you said, I was very critical, but I think I don't know how I would stand and to do it again now. But I knew for the sake of the film I had to shut up a bit, and so that was maybe a little bit manipulative, which is in the end, film is quite manipulative in that sense. But it's also very interesting because now we are a year and a half since the filming of this situation, and so much has changed, I think, and I've been thinking a lot about this question, no, and one of the things that really made me really click about, like, okay, the importance to document something like this was I was watching some street documentaries in Australia, and there were some archival footages from like the 60s, 70s, 80s. And there was a very clear distinction between the way that they were interviewing people off the street, just random people passing by. And you could see a clear distinction between the period of like 70s and 80s. Something happened with the people. I think it's a sense of awareness. And it's like what you said about like, wow, okay, we watch and we can be critical and, maybe even judgy and think, and then you think, can I do this? Well, what if the camera was on me? And Matís, you also said, like, I mean, I wouldn't want to be in your documentary. And yeah, I think it is quite risky. And, of course, I think there's a lot of narcissistic tendencies, which I think is what, as a society, we're very much pushed towards nowadays, not to push it all away, the responsibility. But at the same time, I also appreciate the courageousness of these friends, that I guess we also had a certain amount of trust or maybe naivety about each other's intentions. But it's something that is more and more rare. And I think there's the delusion is growing, and I'm not trying to just be pejorative about that. I think it's really something that's very difficult to see. And one thing that in this film you could see that they were very much being promised and promising further about the idea of escaping the Platonist cave, like if only we have this, then we're going to solve this. And I think even though they are kind of have that ideology on them and kind of repeating it, especially I could see maybe, I don't know, I don't really know, but I suspect that there is even a little bit of doubt that you're asking yourself and you're wondering. And now we're like a year and a half after, no? And so at the time, Andrei was kind of like quite excited because he was speaking positively and financial. And it was because they were in crypto and they made a lot of money. But this was short-lived. And it's not to be like I told you so or kind of thing, but it's also a little bit of sadness, because since then Raul lost a lot and then he fell into quite a deep depression. And I did like a director's documentary, which is like me and my partner, and we went to all the places to revisit, and Raul's van is still parked on Tempelhofer Feld, and there's like notices like, it's going to get towed away, and he's just ignored the whole thing. And yeah, and it's quite sad. There's a big layer of sadness, and I could kind of feel it. It was very difficult during the filming, and well, maybe the editing was even more difficult, to have to like relive in this trauma over and over. It's like a self-created hell, but I kind of enjoy it in a masochistic sense. But yeah, it was also after this was like after the first year of lockdown, and there was another wave after this. And so after the first year of lockdown, I lost like my job, contracts, I lost everything. That I just kind of also saw everything just evaporate in front of me. I had no options. I was kind of disconnected from my job and place in the United States, and then in Germany I was not accepted into any kind of system or safety net. So I was quite horrified, and after 1 year of COVID I was so depressed. I was just kind of excited I just had enough. I want to do something. And so this was kind of gave me a lot of life and some kind of purpose. But yeah, so then the next few months, I really had no money or, production. So it was just myself. But I said, I want to take it to the end so that people can look at this thing this week.
So thank you for this explanation. It also kind of mirrors the feeling that I had that these people are always a bit caught between being very authentic or very lost. I could never. So the ambivalence somehow for me is really very present in your movie. But I was wondering about maybe your relationship to Andrei. That's also in the title. And I just noticed that in the beginning he's filming himself, and then he's filming you, and in the end you are filming him and his monologue. So I was just, is this also some kind of power play going on, or is it a process, or kind of how would you describe this relationship with him as well?
So the title came from, there's a very infamous film that I love. It's called My Dinner with Andrei. And it's a film in the 80s, I believe. And it's just a dinner with two people, and they're talking about the experiences they had, and so a lot of this movie was kind of like shaped after the idea of that as a kind of like ironic twist. But at the beginning there was no intention to focus on Andrei. I just liked this film, and I just thought like, like my dinner with Andrei, and this is going to be my film with Andrei. And he got really excited about it. And so this footage you see of him riding this horsey, he actually he filmed this himself, and then he sent it to me, and he was really excited about this. And when I speak about making a film about us, and he got really, it's like, yeah. And I said like, let's do this with this clip and everything, and he got really excited. But then as the film starts, then it got really difficult, and he was the most evasive out of all the people. It was there was the Andrei that I knew outside of filming, and there was a kind of, and so the question is like, what is authentic? Who is Andrei? Because every time I get the camera on him, he would just either evade or become this politician, or he would insist to let me film you. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's cool if you want, but maybe get your own film. You can make a film about me, make a film about you, but you can't, And I realized as he filmed me, I was like, I'm not sure if he's really interested in this process, or he's really interested in filming me. It's this power play. He felt really like, I think, and I know that he's quite obsessed with, this question, who is top dog and who is bottom bitch. Never mind the misogynistic aspect about it, but just, I can understand that. But even if I was so annoyed with it, and it was painful, and then this last bit, I feel also a bit having to apologize to the audience every time, because then there was the first bit which was nice and kind of idealistic, and I secretly hate it. And people would say, they love Raoul, and they say, yeah, that's great, he's nice and sweet, but it's, it's a bit naive and also frustrating. And then I wanted to get to kind of like some kind of real cinema, whatever like stupid idea I have about that, which is a bit torturous, and so, but it was really difficult because editing, I thought like, this is so shit. What the fuck is he talking about? He's just talking absolute garbage.
That's why you put the music.
Yeah, because I was sitting there editing and just like, fuck, this is so torturous. This is so stupid. I should just cut the whole. But then I if I was to cut out everything I don't like, there would be no Andrei, because I didn't like anything he was saying. And so, but then this was kind of the thing I realized that in my life. So in my life, I realized that a lot of times I'm just, as a racialized person, that I'm never comfortable. And then I realized, so like, with COVID and with also this like new period where I think with the pandemic, it's this thing where there is so much terrible things going on, and we see too much. No, we are exposed to it 24 hours a day. And so I understand from the level of as an individual human that you think, I can't handle all this negativity. At some point you have to say, I shut it off. I don't care. I don't care that there are thousands of children dying in some place because I bought a fucking sofa. And yet at the same time, I realized that on an individual level, I was telling a lot of friends in now that I'm living in Europe, and I was telling them some of the experiences I was going through, some of the racism I was experiencing, some abuse, and they would just look at me like it's not happening, no? And then I started to just lose friends. I wasn't saying like, hey, you fucked me. I was just like, no, oh my God, I did this experience today, and I started to understand things, and they were just like, I could see that they're very uncomfortable, and then it would just disappear, the friend, no? So there was this, and that was kind of, at the beginning I was just shocked. I couldn't even believe that this was happening. I thought something else was going on, and it's taken me another year to kind of digest and understand what is happening on an individual psychological level. So yeah, I lost my train of thought a little bit, thinking about all these things, but yeah.
Or maybe just to add kind of about Andrei, I always had the feeling that you give space to a person and
yeah, that's
has
right.
so much space.
Yeah,
and
that's...
it takes a lot of space in a movie. That is very, or maybe it's subversive, or it's contrasting to the experience you had, that you just now described.
Yeah, that was my point, that and with Andrei, and then also with other types of people like that afterwards, I'm conflicted, because at the same time I know how to be a quiet minority. I know how to not say things. Most of my life I don't say anything. And then there's at the same time with the pandemic, and then I have the time to reflect and to study and to learn, and then say, wait, hold it, this is ridiculous. And I'm also encouraged to, they say, please come and speak. And then I speak to people, and then people panic. And they say, no, you cannot say that. And then one of the complaints I have from people is that, like, what you are saying to me makes me feel very uncomfortable. And then every time I hear that, I realize, wait a second, but my whole life I'm uncomfortable. Everything you've said is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable from day one when, I didn't, my family immigrated for political reasons, and we are in a white supremacist society, and I understand what happened and accept it. But at the same time, nothing is normal or comfortable. And so I would have these kind of repeated conversations with, and this is not so much with public people, but actually with friends that I'm very close to, or even lovers. And I realized that was like, that there's a kind of asymmetry about discomfort. And what I like about BDSM and a lot about queer spaces is actually, it's about discomfort. It's about like seeing something and you don't like it. And so Charlotte in the movie, we discussed, like, it was the first time that she just flew straight from Montana. Like, Fabian had this dream. He really likes innocent young girls, no? And so he you like what you like. And he goes to America, and also I thought, wow, it's so interesting, you go to like across the ocean and you find someone that looks like your cousin. But that's others, and that's fine too, you like what you like. Anyway, so she came to Conk, and then she just flew straight in, and she was really like, and we're all kind of giggling a bit, because it's like, it might be a lot for her, I don't know. And so she saw this scene. It was like some of the older people there doing their thing. A little bit of whipping never hurts anybody. But then she saw it, and she just cried. She wailed. And then I was so angry, I realized. And it took me like more than a year to process and do a bunch of research and reading, understanding why I was angry. And I realized that now there's a thing, it's called the damsel in distress, white damsel. And the thing is, Charlotte is not a child. And it's, again, what I'm saying is conflicted, there's ambivalence. Because at the same time, I'm thinking, maybe it's also envy and jealousy in me, that like, I wish I could go into a space and go, oh, fuck, I don't like that. And I start crying, I don't like it. But ever since I was a child, it's like, no, you shut up, you go with it. No, you do everything that the white people tells you to do, and I put away those emotions. And here's a grown adult woman who is invited to a culture of she's the guest, and she's allowed to come and see something that it's like, this is what they do here. You are the foreigner. when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I'm not saying what she's doing is right or wrong. It's just I was shocked. But the fact that she was not just like sobbing a bit or feeling like, oh, it's a bit uncomfortable. She was wailing, you know, like she became the main central point of the entire thing. And everybody was like, oh, okay. And then we have to go rescue her, you know, like me and Phoenix went and gave her like an hour and a half long fucking massage to calm her down. And, you know, but now I'm thinking, would I have done the same? I think I have much less patience. And that's also tricky because, it's nice to have kind of peace, but at the same time, the peace was at the cost of other people for her benefit. And she's so used to this. And, you know, there's all these little things that like I realize I see, like, for example, she was in the kitchen, no? It's not her kitchen. And there's all these really awkward details. But, for example, this apartment, the backstory, this is the gossip. I think gossips are fun, a little bit. So the story is that Andrei convinced Raoul with the money that they got that Raoul should buy a van, which then gave them the ride to Berlin because Andrei wanted to be in Berlin and convinces him, manipulating him a little bit to live this life in Berlin, to improve himself or whatever. But then when they get to Berlin, Andrei gets the apartment and Raoul lives in a van on the street. And it's super stressful. It's quite awful. And then Fabian and Charlotte came visiting and they also have a van, and so they're in the kitchen. And there's little details, like even this film, I see she's like, can I use this pan? Is this clean? And I was like, you know, I'm just documenting, you know, like I don't participate. And then she's just scraping this, like, you know, right? She didn't know how to use a pan, and she's with this fork, like, and then I was like, oh man, this is very American, I have to say. It's just, you have no idea about anything, but you have been taught your whole life with this kind of privilege that, yeah, you just go around and you think that, and it's so funny that, and you said it's like, the desire is like, I'm going to be a teacher, but it's like, but you don't know anything. But there's this kind of like assumption. And at the same time, I can see that she could actually be a good teacher. And that's the horrific thing. I don't mean good in the absolute sense. I just mean that, you know, her whole life she has the confidence. And I was so shocked when she says, I'm a yoga teacher. And she just sat on the ground and opened her laptop. And she's telling people, just breathe. And I was like, what the fuck? She has no idea what she's talking about. This is like cultural appropriation at its finest, you know? But I understand because she's a beautiful, young, white woman. And if you're a young, beautiful white woman, you have plenty of thirsty men or people who are willing to give you any kind of money, and you can tell them anything you want. You know, and just to make a point, in New York and in the States, the sex repression is much more. And so people are really thirsty, right? And so I went to and so was I, you know, because it's like, fuck, you're just busy working and like everybody's so repressed. And at the same time, it's like sex with everything around you, and you're all unsatisfied. So you chase superficial things to a job or whatever. Anyway, so then one day I saw this thing and it's like, naked yoga. I thought, well, that's nice to do some naked yoga and be free. I show up and it's like not 50, maybe 30 people in a room like this, you know, very packed, all men. And the one teaching yoga is this young, beautiful, white woman, and she's on a literal pedestal. It's like a group domination, session that, and so she's like, the whole thing was not about yoga, it was about submitting and appreciating white supremacy, white female body. And fine, if you're into it, you pay the money, cool, you know, no problem. It's just that it's the invisibleness, and what I don't appreciate is when people take over and, you know, this whole things like yoga, wellness, blah, blah, it's all clumped together, right? And it's literally like, I don't know, not a big deal, but just thousands of years of like people's culture and religion. And when they say tantra, it's like, okay, that's cool, but you realize the sexual, like, you have no idea what you're talking about, is what I'm saying. But the comfort with it, you know, but at the same time, these people, what I do appreciate them is just that, you know, like, I don't know. I mean, now I feel it's a different feeling I have now after 1 year. It's still a really strange experience every time to watch it.
Do you still see them?
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing. After the film, Andrei was quite upset, and it was a bit hard to. I think he didn't really understand himself why he was completely upset, and I think, I think there was a lot of things that triggered him that maybe he couldn't face or didn't want to deal with, and then we had a bit of a falling out, and then Raoul was also very strange. At first, we were good, and we had more talks, and we even made more videos about discussions about these things. But he also separated from Jenny and just kind of ghosted everybody. But I think it was also when he lost all his money in crypto, and I think he was so ashamed of it. I think, this. I always found it interesting that, for example, during wars or even in the concentration camp, people don't tend to commit suicide. But during a financial crisis, people kill themselves all the time. And I always found it very fascinating, like this idea on the one hand, it's like, okay, whatever, it's just money. But people literally lose their house, lose everything, but you have kind of even solidarity to like, okay, we're going to get through this. You might even find a different purpose. I mean, it's painful, but people that lose their jobs, lose the concept of money, knowing that we kind of know that it's false, but it's still, I think, it's not false. It's very real. It's like what they call like the spurious infinity, like this false sense of universality. It's the same as like I don't see color. I don't see, and this idea that there's a concept that like you can say like you have a judge and then you have a person defending themselves in the court. And the fool is to say, but the judge, it's just a wig, a false, fake hair. He's sitting on a chair, but he is just like everybody else. But it's not true. There's meaning behind all these things, and I think that's kind of this falseness about like this promise of this current ideology of like, we all are equal, we are same, and I appreciate like Andrei also saying some of his heartfelt feelings about like as a Romanian, right, and observing and just the power disparities, qualities of life, and also I really appreciate this discussion of like East German, West German. There's a very good book written by an East German psychoanalyst who talks and compares from a psychoanalytic perspective the East German and West German as twins that grew up but were separated at birth and then suddenly having to come back together. And, the West Germany kind of, you got a good deal with the US system and the military. And there's this kind of unconscious snobbing of everybody east of the Iron Curtain. And no one likes to talk about this. And then the people that have the luxuries can say, hey, let's bring more community, la la la. But then the people in the East is like, well, fuck you. Like, we didn't get any of this security and comforts that you had. Well, why should we do this? And no one wants to talk about this. And then it just becomes this like invisible xenophobic or things that could be like, the sexism and unawareness of the Eastern Europeans or even other parts of the world. But I think there's so much unconscious biases in class that it's so uncomfortable to talk about. But for me, I don't think I've achieved that in this film, but what I like was just that these guys had things that they wanted to say, maybe as men especially, as men that are not part of like a mainstream liberal discussion. I don't even agree with them, but I think a big problem is that we don't hear at all anything that they say, and there is no conversation, because there's, again, back to the beginning thing I was saying about the discomfort, because now it's really like because there is so much discomfort, but there's one uncomfortable conversation, I'm always going to back out. And so we don't ever get to speak about things, and it just requires so much resource, and nobody has time for that. I don't want to engage with you because I don't agree with your style, with your politics, and you judge me, so bye, fuck off. And it's just, we're all getting more and more divided, and it's super horrific. And so I appreciate also this acting, we're coming together, having a ceremony, and as much as it's nice to criticize about it, but you know, it's at the end, I don't think life is on the metaverse. I just, no.
Yeah,
So
but it's interesting, right? Like that there is either that sometimes there seems to be either we don't talk with each other because we realize we don't belong together, or there is this approach of like, we can also try to all be equal. But both is avoiding the actual problems and the actual like, okay, we have different opinions, we are different, we have different perceptions of the world, and we need to deal with each other. And this is not happening. And this is like, I think this is for me what I like so much about this film, that it puts me constantly in this discomfort. But I think this is life somehow. So that's something that I like about it. I would be very curious if there is like, now hearing more stuff, any other perception of the film. I'm actually also curious because it could also be that someone says like, sorry, I don't appreciate that at all. I find it shit because my perception is completely different of the whole stuff. And I would also appreciate that actually, because it's not about like just liking everything that we present. It's rather more about like also being critical. So you're very welcome to also say something else, what's on your mind or on your heart.
Would you tell us what conk is?
Well,
Everybody
I would like you to have explained what conk is because because you know better.
do I?
I think no, but you have. I don't know. It's your film, and you from that perspective, I find it also interesting.
Yeah, conk is it's a space organized by Felix Ruckert, and it's I don't know the official explanation, so I can just give my perspective. But they have there's a place in East Germany near Berlin, and it's like an old DDR hotel that was used by like DDR officials. That was back in the days, and now every month are they doing it still this year? No, they've paused for quite some time, but it's a bit not explore exactly if you know that, but it's a community place where people can go, and usually it's at least 3 days. Sometimes there's longer versions, and there's a place you can stay in, and there's a lake, and people come together, and it's sex positive. You can do BDSM things. You can also just have a sauna or sit in a hot tub. I mean, when I was a kid in Australia growing up, I would watch on the television, and they would have these like weird documentaries about Europeans. And one thing I thought was so weird, I thought it was like the most insane thing was like, some French and German people, they do this thing called nudist colonies. And I would watch on television, I think like, what barbarians, like, this is so crazy. But deep down I was also like, that would be nice. And of course I would have dreams, you're naked and stuff, and I would... And then I would watch these documentaries and like German people playing ping pong, and they just with their kids, and I thought like, this is so like in a dream, it's not real. And then when I came to met these, I thought like this is the most normal thing ever. I really love it. So that's kind of conk, kind of.
There's
no ping pong actually.
I just want, and in the movie, I think a person is talking about cock, and it's just this phrase is just everybody's happy. That's cock.
Who said that?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I think that maybe just to add that, I think somehow the aim of this is to I think that Felix sometimes says it is like to give as much as possible freedom to everyone what they want to do with their time there. So there is just a tiny bit of structure. There's just a breakfast time at 10:30 or so, and then there is a dinner, and it's being cooked for everyone. So people just appear, can take their food, and then they do their own dishes. But that's it. You don't need to do anything more than this. And the people that go there, lots of them are into BDSM and into lots of sex and into experiencing themselves making lots of. It's a big community that usually goes to workshops, like I'm also offering, or like these sex positivity workshops or so, but a lot of play stuff and kinky stuff, and they gather there and they just try to, enjoy this freedom to do the weirdest stuff. And sometimes it's really magical, because then suddenly you have 8 or 10 people that gather and that come up with a completely crazy idea, and they prepare a space and set a theme, and everybody suddenly starts to co-create and say like, okay, yes, what can we contribute to this idea? And I don't know, it really provides it has a big potential. Sometimes it's super boring and it's just stupid fucking around. And then again, somehow the constellation fits, and then you make the most amazing experiences. So yeah, it's also a very ambivalent thing. And I've also been there and felt super shit for 2 days. And the last day, suddenly something happens where I'm really like, wow, I haven't had such a good experience for days. So it's also an emotional roller coaster, up and down, can be super intense. So yeah.
Just save this concept for me. During the film, I thought I'm never ever going to come.
I plan to do something like this in Switzerland now. Yeah.
Yes, as you were talking about Charlotte, and there was a feeling that I had also from the position of women in this role, which was very objectifying, and kind of like, the girl cutting apples and preparing food and feeding the guy. And I noticed also the voice of women was substantially less. So I'm just wondering, like, how, if the woman would be how different would be this movie if the women were in the forefront rather than men? Just curious about.
No, yeah, this question came up a lot, this. I actually wanted to make just a film about men, actually. Because I really wanted for many different reasons. But so, for example, like one thing was like, let's say Jenny, that was in the van with Raoul, and some people thought that she lives with Raoul, but that's not the case. They met each other. Raoul was sucking her dick, as he said. I didn't know Jenny at that time really well, so it was not arranged. It was arranged that I was going to interview Raoul, and she just happened to be around. So I think maybe for sure you can witness a lot of tendencies, structures that is there. But I actually feel that I think it's important. I feel I want to see more content about men critically, because it's not about promoting. It's more just, I think there's just getting less and less discussions about men in all of the arrays of both, mostly just it's not about good or bad, just like it's not discussed enough. And I'm a man. Well, I don't know what that even means, but just I do feel the invisibility of that. And then the true deep conspiratorial reason of doing this film has nothing to do with any of this, as I wrote in the introduction. But this film started was because I had a very deep relationship with a friend, a musician, and he ghosted me during the beginning of the pandemic. And because I didn't even tell him what I had to say critically, I was so afraid because I knew he would not handle it. And I was just crying. I didn't even say anything. And he had so much guilt, and he just told me, it's not true, it's not true, it's not true, and then hung up the phone. And I never heard from him again. And during that time, that was the peak, or the one peak of Asian hate crimes in the world, especially in Europe and in America, because of like China flu. And this was something that is not really spoken about outside of Asian communities and in the mainstream media. And then as I studied more about the history of cinema, the history of Asian men in diaspora, so I don't mean Asian men in Asia, that's a different thing, because then you just be part of the hegemonic society. I mean Asian men in Europe or in America. And I looked into the history, and it's just appalling. What is the history? You know, like for example, the first Hollywood star is actually a Japanese man, and he was so popular that the white men felt so threatened by his presence. He was the first big Hollywood celebrity of history, and the women, white women, were so much enamored by this man that the white man made a law against Asian men to be portrayed in the cinema, on screen. And so same goes for interracial relationships, kissing, and of course no sex, but not even represented. And this law was not lifted until the 60s or 70s. And if you look at history of cinema in America, in Hollywood and so on, you won't see this kind of interracial representation or masculine character doing anything. And so, for example, there's a historical film called Romeo Must Die. It's with Jet Li and Alaya, who's a black woman. And they made this film, and it's a studio film. And when they made the film, they did both at the end, because he's supposed to be a rescuing character. And they were supposed to kiss. Well, it's a romantic thing. He saved her. No, and they did a scene where they kissed, and they did a scene where they just hugged. And they gave the film to a research focus group, where they invited a white audience, a random audience, and they watched it and they said, "It's disgusting that they kissed. We don't like it." And so they cut it out from the final release. And this is the biggest like Asian mixed race kind of thing, you know, it's super taboo, even till today. And so for me, I realized like, okay, so then at the same time during this period of COVID, they say like, there's a lot of people fighting for representation. And, you know, I go back to Audre Lorde's quote that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And I thought this is pointless trying to beg a white institution for more Asian representation, because forever you will be portrayed in the way that it's still very biased. And so this film was actually a way for me to make my own film and put my naked ass in front. And I knew if I make a film, I was doing a podcast called Asian Provocation, and that was great. And I got to share a lot of stories and research with a lot of different people. But the people that watched it and looked at it were already usually, as they say, singing to the choir, preaching to the choir, sorry. And there was people like Andrei or Fabian, and this is the funny thing. So the musician I told you about, this white man, he could not listen to what I was saying, and he would consider himself a very liberal, progressive person. And most of my liberal, progressive friends, they would get very uncomfortable when I speak about this subject. You know, on the surface, they would say, yes, of course, but then I wouldn't hear from them again. And fascinating enough, Fabian, of all the friends, was one of the few white peoples that could actually believe me and see what I'm saying. Of all and even men, women, progressive feminists and so on, most people wouldn't listen to about this. But Fabian, he could see it. And he would even make fun of me, which actually I felt very relaxed about. No, we would go to Bavaria and I would tell him like, yeah, these people are racist and whatever. And my liberal friends would usually say, no, it's not true. It's like this or that. And Fabian would look at it and go, yeah, she was racist. She really hates you. And then he would be like, okay, let's go to another cafe. Let's go and you ask for the Wi-Fi password. And then I ask for the Wi-Fi password. And let's see, you know? And he was actually courageous, or, you know, because his identity is not embroidered in that he's not racist. He doesn't care. And funny enough, because of that, I could actually have a closer relationship with this man, despite being white. That of all the progressive friends, he was the one that would still, you know, I'm not painting him as an angel. He also has problems, and we have different difficulties in our relationship. But this is the ambivalence, and so yeah, I mean, and then speaking about women, not to be a kind of resentful kind of attitude, but you know, it's very problematic. I think, you know, this discussion about white feminism, and as an Asian man living in Europe and in America, it's white feminism is very destructive, and it's very, you know, it takes over a lot of things. You know, like the history of Me Too. It's very unfortunate. You know, starting as a black woman's situation, and then the white feminism completely takes over, and no one really notices things. And same is that, like, the same thing will happen with, like, Me Too. Like, people are very excited to come and talk about that, and then Black Lives Matter, and then God forbid talk about Asian hate. It's like just, and then the usual thing, even amongst Asian, they would say, it's not our turn. Like, it's first we have to wait for the Black lives, and then, and above that, white women problems. But if you look at the history of, white feminism, it's very destructive. And so I'm not here about silencing. I think there's plenty of very good material, and I also find it very important to understand about the history of that and to look into that. But I also sort of like, no, I also want to do my own thing, not because I feel guilty or something to hide. I just think that it's experiences that I'm going through that I feel very important to look at. So that was a kind of a long explanation.
It just brings me this phrase, that there's so much stuff. It's like there's the water that we are swimming in that we don't know. All these things, it's just all so just like this.
Yeah.
So it's almost like people just don't know. It's not that they're ignorant. It's just it has been there so long that it's just became a norm, right? So it's like unlearning all of that kind of.
Yeah. No, it's a really difficult thing. I just tell you a random story, and I heard this thing about there was a terrorist group in, I don't know, East Africa somewhere, and they had some demands that they wanted to make, and so they kidnapped a bunch of boys and tortured them, and they had demands from the government, and nobody cared. And then they go, oh, that was a fucking shit show. So they tried it again, and this time they captured a bunch of girls, and suddenly it was on front page news. And this is not to say men are, or poor men or something. It's just an interesting point to look at the way that, and this goes back to Charlotte, which is like, it's like her crying, and it's this like central theme. And on her social media now, she's like, oh, she wants to make more crying content this year, about her difficulties and suffering, and as a leader, and to kind of. And I'm not saying that it's like, women don't have difficulties, and for sure there's a lot to talk about, but when it's combined with late capitalism and like everybody has to push their victim story, not to say that there's nothing to have difficulties about, but becomes a thing that you need to make money from, it's crazy. Like then it's, it's, and this all has to do with money, it goes back to that whole thing. I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this thing about, what is it, you guys can correct me, but like that Larry Fink or whatever, the big company that controls everything in the world, that's influencing all the things. So they have the system where it's like a company credit system. Sorry, again, I'm butchering because I'm not an economist, but they basically, after the last big crash, they came in, they gave this thing to say like, you, as a company, you have to do, was it the ECG score? You have to show that you are caring about the environment and about women and all these things. But it's not that the companies care, and I think it's important. Of course, we should care about people and women and children and so on. But the companies, big companies, they don't care. They just need the score. And the score is just so that they can get more money from the government. And this is a trickle-down effect, so that at the end, and Europe also has to follow a bit, and in the end, people just start repeating this thing because every level, they have to do this because they print trillions of dollars, and the only way you're going to get this if you pass a certain score. And all of this is not to say that the values or things are not important, but it's completely ideological. And that is like you said, the water that we swim in, and there's no criticism on that. And then we just start to then at the end of the day this is the new racism, that the Romanians and these conservative people, they don't get it, and that is the new racism that is obfuscating, like, because anyway, there's a class divide. Anyway, it's not like yesterday we were racist and today we don't like them because they're sexist or racist. It's like there is that divide anyway. And then now the divide is like, oh, you don't know that right now we care about this gender and this race and this issue? And then that gives a new way to explain that we don't like these groups. And I think that sometimes undiscussed, it's like maybe unconsciously we're not having resolved some things. And yeah, I don't think there's an answer to how to do that.
I mean, there are many different layers we could still discuss about also the role of the music bit kind of, for me, also added to, and this uncanny feeling, people speaking about happiness, and then you have this very heavy music. So this would be, it's an observation, or as well this topic about this male fragility that
Yes,
you were also
yes, exactly.
discussing, or was also discussed by Felix Ruckert in his review, where I found it interesting to listen to their conversations. And on the one hand, you see them searching and questioning norms of societal norms and trying to find their authentic self. But then you also see them, I don't know, maybe getting lost. Or I think the word and they cling to is perverted. That's kind of there where they can say, but this is how society sees me. This is the way I'm being maybe not accepted. Whereas kind of what the conversation was now about, also how you experience to be not part of the hegemonical norm, and how this experience is so much different. So for me also it had this bitter taste for them to cling to this word, to have their own process of finding themselves in a way. But I don't know. It's just a reflection, kind of how is this male vulnerability constructed in this movie, and where, because it's a very current topic, and I also can appreciate them, and I feel with them kind of on their path, and at the same time it's also a bit revolting. So, but again, I think we are again in this ambivalence that you created, that for me also makes this movie very strong, that it doesn't resolve itself somehow. Yeah. So maybe this is just a feedback.
Yeah, I
or
appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have something to add to that.
Mhm.
Like the Velveteen. I mean, you guys can make your own this decision what this film is or is not. But Velveteen in the film, she at the very beginning she was one of the first to say, "Okay, yeah, great, but you cannot say that this is a documentary." And I was always like thinking like, okay, I mean, what do you want to call it? And later she said, okay, at most you can say she said, yeah, it's like a spoof documentary. And I had some thoughts about that. But yeah, with the music, I mean, sure, it's also depending on how strict you are about documentaries and where you want to put music, no? And I think, of course, one of the horrible cliches of Hollywood, let's say, is like you have a sad scene, so you have sad music. No, and it's like, in case you forgot or in case you didn't know it's sad, you please be sad now. And now here's happy, so be happy. Or here's exciting, and you know, you have some Hans Zimmer music and you have to be very excited. And this is so kitsch. And at the same time, I'm also being very manipulative and just wanting to make some music. To kind of, maybe it's my insecurity to think like, oh my God, they're talking such bullshit and this cannot carry, no one would sit through 2 hours of this nonsense. But at the same time, I do think it's perhaps my way of like, instead of just speaking as well, taking over or having more of my point of view to add to it. But I mean, I really love, for example, the works of Adam Curtis. I don't know if you guys know some of his works, and there it carries such a large, wide variety, almost schizophrenic view on society and history, and also combining with pop music. Unfortunately, I don't have the licenses for getting really good pop music for my film, so I made my own. But I do think there's something to be said about, just kind of adding to the mix. Because let's say when Velveteen says it's not a documentary, I kind of know, at least it's like, okay, I just imagine some like terrible documentaries on Netflix. And for me, this is not documentary. There's most of it is just ideology machines. No, it's like if you live in Stalinist Soviet Union, and it's just like you have to think this way. And I don't think there's much difference in today's world, that the most content is just telling you today you have to be vegan, tomorrow you have to be this. No, and it's, if you don't, you're an asshole. You know? If you don't, then we're gonna cancel you. You're gonna be sent to the virtual gulags. And I think this is such a false promise of utopia. It's like, if you watch this documentary, you believe this, then you're going to be safe from all of the problem that we just listed at the beginning of this documentary. And I'm very skeptical about this format. So I think the other part is also, I'm making this music, and I am aware that it's sometimes like bombastic, and to kind of like, I guess I'm also guilty of and wanting to say, like, don't take my word for it either, like I'm the one editing. I clearly have a power to choose the parts that they're saying and not saying, and make it seem like I'm the nice guy and Andrei's the asshole. But don't be fooled, like, I also be skeptical of me. So yeah, that's kind of the direction there. But for sure, this idea of male fragility, white fragility, I think there's so much more to be discussed. But as a random plug, the follow-up of this film, I realized that there was such a stress and difficulty to get people with camera and even audio. And so my next book, it's about squirting. And actually, it's with Andrei. So this is the funny story that's kind of left out. So at the party, they were asking me, they wanted me, because in this group, they've kind of understand me as the king of squirt. I have magical golden fingers, as Felix Rocket would say. And I was thinking, like, this is so stupid. Like, I feel so embarrassed. But then I thought, is it just my insecurity? Maybe I should just own it, Maybe I am good. So what? Anyway, but then I realized I wanted to do a documentary about that. But then, this film was so difficult as it is to get people to be on camera, let alone like, okay, let's talk about squirt. And so I decided to write a book about it. And so I just have audio recordings. And there, I realized there's this trove. It's like, at the same time, we have more information than we have ever before. But on the other hand, I realized there's so much of our unawareness or unconsciousness, not even like super unconscious, just what is not said publicly is getting even bigger. Like, if, we say to ourselves privately, maybe with our therapist at most, but there's more than ever things that we don't speak about. And so the follow-up of this book is a book about that. It's called the Zen and the Art of Squirt, or the Sadness of Pleasure. And it will be the follow-up of this as a kind of part 2. Yeah. It was with Andrei, and I was just laughing with his hands and stuff, because I taught him also the technique, and in the end he wanted to show it on to me, and so he fingered me, and I thought, like, Jesus, this is horrible. You have learned nothing. Yeah, it was a kind of interesting turn of events. Yeah.
So maybe this is a good closing with a preview.
Yeah.
And a good kind of joke or
Yeah.
sad story.
We had kind of thought to end this with an orgy also. So if you're in, we could still go for that. It's not really true. But I mean, still possible. And
After we heard about the magical fingers.
You have to buy the book first.
yeah, thank you all for coming. I would have wished for more audience for this beautiful film, which I really like. Still, I'm looking forward to hear it a third time, to see it a third time.